Thank you, everyone. Coming back to the last session for hearing day 2. We've got Northland Federated Farmers here, Colin Hanna and Roger Ludbrook and David Wilson. So,
No, Roger. So we're going to make apologies for Roger. Roger's had to take his son to Karakara Hospital, so will not be with us today.
Okay, no, thank you. And we also have online the next submitter. Just want to make sure that we've got that person here. That Mr. John Riddell is waiting in the wings to be the next submitter. Are you there, Mr. Riddell? Oh, I thought you were there, but maybe not. Okay. So, is Mr. Wilson that isn't going to be here? Is that right? Are you Mr. Wilson?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Ludbrook?
Mr. Ludbrook, his apologies.
His apologies. Oh, well, we hope that it's not too serious and his son makes a full recovery. Okay, so you must be Colin Hanna.
I am.
And we have a statement of evidence. We've got 2 statements of evidence, one from Mr. Riddell and one from Mr. Monroe. Mr. Crowe, which one do we want to address first?
I'm hearing. Well, we should look at this a little bit.
We've all pre-read the evidence.
Yes.
So we're quite happy for you to do a summary for us.
Yeah, I think from Federated Farmers point of view, in fact, I'll start with my background is computer science and finance. I'm a passionate farmer, and I'm farming in Ōmāpere. So I've been here in Auckland, President of Federated Farmers. I'm also a member of Ōmāpere, which is rural health in New Zealand. And some of the stuff that we might reflect on today will come from our background, from my background around mental health and other issues that we're experiencing here in health and in Auckland in particular.
Right.
Okay. So, and Dave, you can just jump in any time. So, shorten up the summary of evidence that Joanne and the team sent me. Basically, they've said under the ecosystem Indigenous biodiversity, the discussions they've had with your own staff, we're basically in agreement with that. So I'm happy to take any questions that might emerge from that. Under natural character, your team and ours are generally in agreement to that. Natural features and landscapes. The key points that we had on that, we were in agreement on. And then on the coastal environment, again, we came to an agreement on the points where we disagreed on. And I think a lot of that reflects back on Joanne's hard work and her background as not only a planner but also as a lawyer, has made that a lot easier for us. So
that's the issue of high natural character and outstanding natural character.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we're basically in agreement between the council and ourselves at this point in time. What I want to talk about today is the impact that you people have on our rural Northland. This year, I'm wearing my Rural Support Trust hat at the moment. Our calls Rural Support Trust are up 300% on what we would normally expect at any given time. And that's a reflection on a number of issues. Primarily, the first will be finance. So a lot of these people will be struggling to meet their tax bills. They'll be struggling to pay their bills on farm and their rates bills in particular. Whilst I appreciate that Northland Farmers District Council actually managed to bring in some money from elsewhere and reduce that, great, and we support that. However, I think it's papered over the cracks, and we'll have to have another chat later on in the future about that. So the impacts of and I'll refer to it, it's not depression, but it's anxiety. And if you get too much anxiety, it doesn't matter. It's the fear of something that you don't have control over. And we're seeing a lot more of that in Northland. And I want to bring that to the Commissioner's attention, because I think it's important that your decisions in fact impact people's lives. Okay. And so that was one of the things. I wanted to draw to your attention. Now, in Northern, Dairy NZ reported last week in the Waikato, 80% of the dairy farms weren't making a profit. I would suggest to you that would be much higher up here, and those that are making profit will probably have no debt. And on our beef farms, yes, we're all really struggling to make a profit and pay tax this year. And it's just a whole combination of events, not just one thing. You look at our horticulture industry, the avocado industry are really struggling. So in the rural economy, and putting on my finance hat, and I do a lot of work for the Northern Link, which is the financial arm of the Regional Council. And I'm looking at the social costs that we're starting to see. A lot of it, and when we had COVID actually showed up just how important the agriculture industry was in Northern. 50% of our income in Northern is derived out of agriculture. And so the trickle-down effect is working from an economic point of view. The dairy farmers, because they get a monthly check, that trickles down into the urban economy probably 6 or 7 times. With the beef farmer, because he might only get 1 or 2 checks a year, that's likely only be 4 or 5 times. So it has a huge impact on the social well-being of our region. I just want to make that clear. And I'm happy to take any questions from people about what.
I'll wait till Ian brings questions.
Oh, you're calling for questions now?
Yeah, I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, shorten us up for you.
Oh, well, okay, well, I'll start off. Yeah, no, thank you for that, and thank you for expressing your concerns about well-being. We all need to sometimes remind ourselves the purpose of the Resource Management Act is to provide for people's health and social well-being, whilst achieving a whole lot of our environmental outcomes. But the whole purpose of it is to provide for people's health and social and economic well-being. So we've got that front and centre as the purpose that we need to be reminded of. So your point is well made. This question of the high natural character versus outstanding natural character and whether councils can actually introduce provisions that have high natural character. Are you happy to talk about that, or is that something you want to leave the legal submission evidence?
I'm happy to talk on the periphery of it, because one of the things that I've noticed is if we go ahead with some of that, it's going to impact on a lot more of our iwi farmers because of where their land is located. So I think we do have to have a think about that. And I'm just looking at it on a much broader split picture.
The natural character stuff, and also, it's been run back from what it was, but biodiversity stuff, it always seems, even the coastal stuff, it seems to penalise people that haven't buggered their environment. You bring a bunch of rules on to people who so far have maintained the character or the ecosystem, and it actually, because they haven't destroyed it in the past, it actually severely limits their ability to make money off their land. And it's, obviously there's reasons why you want to protect those things, but it's also hamstrings people who are generally in a poorer financial position, particularly like iwi and stuff, as they finally get treaty settlements start trickling in, or funding availability for some sort of intensification of land, even if it's just more fencing rather than, I'm not talking about intensive dairy, I'm just talking about not running 3 cows on property. Those people are actually ones that are penalised by those rules. So we're quite glad to see that they've been watered down from, particularly the biodiversity stuff, from what it was a few years ago. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, there's a section of Ms. Cook's submission or evidence where she said that that you don't support the separation of high natural character from outstanding natural character, and it was put to us that the Resource Management Act basically doesn't enable you to make that distinction. And I thought, well, that's an interesting point to make, because there are multiple districts that have these sorts of overlays where they have high natural character and outstanding natural character, and I just wanted to understand what does that mean that those instruments potentially aren't in compliance with the Resource Management Act either? But I suspect that's possibly a question that only
Joanne.
Joanne could answer. I won't expect you to answer a very legal question.
Yeah.
If you're not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer.
You know, maybe the council officers can give us some further comment on that when they summarise. You can have a comment now, but I'm quite happy to wrap it up later.
I guess, well, the rationale for the high natural character is the NZCPS requires you to map at least high natural character in the coastal environment, and the NZCPS also has very strong direction around outstanding natural character, as we know. So that's kind of the rationale for the split between outstanding and high. In section 6A, well, it doesn't say outstanding or high. I think classifying natural character that way really helps you meet your obligations under section 6A, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I suppose the rationale would be an NZCPS cannot be inconsistent with the part 2 of the Act. Okay. Well, that's quite a legal question, but you know, feel free to weigh in.
No, I think we'll leave that with Joanne because she's got a much broader sphere around and interest around all the other aspects around that with her social science stuff as well.
Yeah, what I sort of found quite heartening in your evidence is the fact that you made submissions, council officers have listened, and the two of you are really quite closely aligned. It's really good to see submitters and council agreeing with each other. Makes our job a lot easier.
Certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I went to a climate change conference in Europe in 2019, and to see what was happening around the world and get my head around what agriculture was the place that it was playing. And number 2 from the French ministry, he had a couple of glasses of wine, but he tapped me on the chest and said,
Breakfast.
probably for breakfast, yeah. He said, no, it wasn't, I can assure you, it was later in the day. There's only 2 things important at the moment, he said, in this world for peace, and that's food. And we're seeing that in Europe right now. And so one of the things that I don't want to see with a lot of regulation coming in that is starting to impact on our ability to produce those 2 key factors.
No, thank you.
You know, I read the submission of the evidence and was kept looking for where there was disagreement and I got to the end.
Yeah.
I don't have any questions, but no, that's good.
I've just had a couple of questions. We'd had discussion about the size of the building to be built, and what was suggested was up to 100 square metres. And then there was the suggestion about the exempt works under Schedule 1 for a rural building, and that causes up to 110 square metres. I just wasn't sure any practical feedback about what would work or not, and any trends you've seen since those exempt work rules have come in for the Building Act.
I think
That was for pole sheds.
Yeah. A lot of the issues that we're seeing are actually probably coming more from the regional council rather than from yourselves. My own view on that, again, that's likely to impact more on our iwi and Maori people, given what they're trying to do, in particular for their housing and issues like that. That would be my view at the moment.
Yep, and another question I had was about the amount of vegetation to be cleared as a permitted activity, and that's been a discussion point through these submissions. Because of the legal opinion we've had from to our council relating to the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity about the mapping of SNAs, or not mapping SNAs. The amount of clearance for Indigenous biodiversity has been a talking point about what's reasonable or not. Based on this here, I was just looking at the submission in a practical, I guess, can you please give practical, in a practical opinion about what is reasonable? Is it based on the size of the land area, like 200 hectares compared to 1 hectare? because the current rules don't have reference to lot size, or as well, if there's 100% coverage of that title or not in Indigenous biodiversity. So, yeah, just any practical examples you've seen.
It would depend on what it is and where it is. To me, I've actually read the whole thing, to be honest, but like, I think last time I looked at all that stuff was a lot of that stuff's around like Manuka and stuff. I consider that you probably need to go back so many years. If it wasn't there, then you'd have I think clearing more would be okay, but realistic. If it was 20 years ago, there was no Manuka there, now it's scattered. To me, that's different from going and clearing a few big old carry trees. I think in reality, the world's moved on from clearing old growth forest, and I think regardless of I personally don't think you should be anyway, and I don't think anyone can reasonably argue for it. But if you're talking about regenerating scrub or shrublands, depending on which viewpoint you're coming from, there's probably a different discussion to be had. I'm not sure what the actual size area is, but I think it's pretty small. Yeah.
Just adding to that listing, looking at Northland, over 50% of our land area is actually up in either native or forest. So I think we're now down to about 48% in pasture land, something like that, from the last bit of work that I did for a response back to the regional council.
Yeah, I think with the I don't know actually what the plan says, to be honest, but with regard to sort of Manuka, which is where usually the arguments lie, I would sort of say if it was within if scrub clearance or Manuka clearance was part of a sort of ongoing farm process, it should be left as that. I think that the boundary shifts when you start talking about Manuka that's growing there for 50 years, but if it's been slashed or sprayed in the last 20 years, that's probably just a different story. It's almost like it's a lot of that sort of scrub control, which we call scrub. If I want my ecologist hat on, I call it regenerating shrubland. That's actually done on a 10 or 12 year cycle anyway on a hill country farm, because if you're talking about when the sort of combination of economics and when you've got a bit of spare cash to allow that sort of work to happen. So, it's sort of clearing small areas of low value habitat within a, sort of farming time frame. I'd like to see that being bigger than if it's clearing, high value habitat, which probably shouldn't be able to rule, That's a personal opinion, rather than a feds one. But
I don't think I think from Federated Farmers' point of view, we would support that. We're not here about cutting down native forest at all.
It's really just, when does scrub become not scrub, and then sometimes you've got 100 hectares and it's mostly gorse with a bit of Manuka in, and a farmer would say you could clear that, and if I was an ecologist, I'd say you can't, and that's once again, it probably is the if you're too harsh on clearing scrub, once again you're impacting probably iwi and sort of low income farmers more than well established farms, because that's all long gone. So there's a little bit of fairness around it.
We're just coming out here now with all that woolly nightshade in amongst the tea tree and the Manuka. That's probably a case in point where. See, in Northland, when I did some work back, if you go back to 1962, when the old Ministry of Forestry and Agriculture did some work, and there was about 30,000 hectares of elite soils here in Northland. And from the work that I can do, I can only find that about 4,000 hectares of that's been currently utilised. So my suspicion, and it's a lot of that is sitting on Maori land, and just that comment that could actually hinder progress. That's the comment. Just supporting what Dave said, and I mean, I sort of like here, I'm thinking, that was a bit of a bad paddy, there was a bit of work was done on it, for example.
Some of that stuff that's going down the Mangataria Valley on the way to Dargaville there, that's, not part of Kaiko, it's gorse and woolly nightshade, and there's probably a bit of manuka in there, that's fantastic soils. You could, that's better than Kerry soils probably for horticulture, but, it's, most of it's, multi-owned land, so it's just sort of sat there, but if you too strictly interpret some of those biodiversity rules, those will never get a chance to do anything with that other than grow a bit of manuka, and potentially you could be growing just about anything. Which when you're looking at a community like Kaikoura, which is, pretty big, a big income source like that would be pretty good.
So thank you for your responses in regards to farming. But now we have national policy statements for highly productive land and Indigenous biodiversity, which is in the sort of potential change. Have you found some of your farmers are looking at diversity of farming as opposed to just dairy cattle? Is there in your membership potential farmers looking at that diversity? Our council have signalled that any new farming activities would require a new resource require a resource consent. Just thinking about diversity in regards to farming smarter rather than farming harder. But I think some farms have been around for generations, and now with these policy directions on highly productive land, which is great from a farming perspective, or Indigenous biodiversity, do you find your members are looking at diversifying their farming?
Absolutely. And just I might answer that question in a bit more detail. Now, Feds are looking at that at the moment because we've got situations, goat farming is a classic example at the moment, right? So they've changed a dairy farm to a goat farm, and now the bottom's dropped out of the goat milk, and so they wanted to go back to dairy. That cannot happen. So there's an issue there. So land use change, if you go, you can't go back. And so that is concerning Federated Farmers at the moment, and we're looking into it, and we have, but again, that will probably show up more in the rewritten probably Resource Management Act maybe at this point in time. But to answer your question, yes, we are concerned, and we do know a lot of farmers are looking at alternative land uses because of where we're sitting with our return on dairy, beef, and sheep, particular as well. So yes,
Subdivided into lifestyle blocks.
some of those.
I think, just to add to what Colin said, one of the reasons New Zealand farming's traditionally flourished is that we've had the flexibility of land use that, when I was young, Northern was summers were a lot drier than they are now, it seemed, and there were people all over the show trying to grow different things, like for feed for cattle. So some of the neighbours, we used to laugh at them because they grew sorghum and others millet, and eventually sort of they had on maize was the best one. But if you had to get like planning permission or resource consent just to tittle around in a couple of paddocks with a new little hobby, you actually get less. You're going to get less people just sort of experimenting, and that's how farming's always improved itself. Is just usually someone that's the last person you'd think, so some sort of hillbilly and Rip Swanee and torn broken gumboots. He's just touching around his back paddock and come up with something. And in my wild man's example, in some ways, when I was young, he started fencing all his streams because he thought he got sick of the cows falling in really.
Yeah.
But he was like the first person in our district to do it, and everyone laughed at him. And now it's, but that was sort of, that whole valley where he farmed everyone had their streams fenced before it even became an issue because they saw that it worked, and that was just like, you know, some silly old duffer bloody six point cows out of the stream, you know, and then once it caught on, you know, so it's little things like that the people having the ability to experiment, which I think French rules is actually going to make that harder. And like so things become one way, and then you're actually going to entrench worse practices because it's too hard to get out of. And particularly up here, where you've got you haven't got big corporate farms that can pull in a lot of money to make a big change and fight their way through the resource consent system. Northland has got probably more than anywhere in the country, sort of small, family-owned, unprofitable or semi-profitable farms that are usually, in many cases, including mine, are backed up by off-farm work or, you know, in my case, my wife's got a job, you know, so rather than everything I do. So it's and Northland's a very different case, you know, we actually got a heap of different soils and microclimates, and we've actually got the ability to grow probably a lot of stuff, but we need the ability for sort of the eccentrics to experiment, and if you take that away, they won't, or they will, but they'll get in trouble.
And just backing up what Dave said, I sat on the Kaipara Kai project.
Oh,
Okay, and one of the interesting thing out of that was Coriolis, who were the lead in terms of, right, they took us down a path which, because we had so many multiple small titles, we were never going to get scale, which they were looking for the next crop.
Yep.
And so that, two of us backed out of it then because we just said this is frustrating, we're never going to get scale because there was too many small titles around the Kaipara to come up with something that was going to be useful in terms of scale, because it just wasn't going to happen. So yeah, it sort of backs up what you're saying. So we do need some flexibility with it to get the next best crop, whatever that might be.
as you say, yeah, it's like innovation and community solutions.
Yep. Yeah, but we do need to remember that these small little titles can actually be our impediments too.
Okay.
Questions? Commissioner Kensington?
No questions from me. There's been a good discussion. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much for both your presentations. I think it's been really helpful evidence. I'm sure we'll see you again in further hearings down the track.
I'm sure of that. And the reason we turned up today is we didn't want to think that our report had been generated by AI, that we were here, and we do exist.
I think we can award your presentation the quote of the day. I'm sitting on the double, but sick of pulling cows out of the stream. As a reason for fencing your streams. That might have to make its way into the plan somehow. Okay, thank you.
Have a good day.
It's going to be out quoting. Right, so we have Mr. Riddell, last but not least. Mr. Riddell, are you online? Mr. Riddell and Mr. Adams, I take it.
Yeah, correct. Kia ora, it's Andrew here, and this is Robert Adams here in the orange.
Okay, well, thank you. Can you see and hear us? We can see and hear you.
Yeah, the audio is a bit echoey from your end, but we can sort of hear it.
Okay, no, if I speak slower, is that better?
Yeah, yes.
Well, thank you very much. We are running just a little bit late, but we don't want to curtail any of your evidence, but I will preface that by saying we have read your evidence, Mr. Riddell, quite comprehensive evidence. So perhaps you'd just like to summarise maybe the main thrust, or we're in your hands.
Well, as far as I go, you've read my evidence. I'll answer questions, but I don't intend to actually say anything about it. But Robert wants to say a bit about his submission, which is the rural living properties at the back of Long Beach, which I cover in my evidence. I give him the planning evidence on that point, but he wants to just talk about that.
Okay, oh well, perhaps you'd like to lead off then, Mr. Adams.
Okay, thank you. I'm pleased to see that the reporting planner moved to address most of the concerns with the coastal overlay over urban areas. But however, it's very unclear to me whether or not it includes the areas, the second row of houses on Long Beach, which I occupy one of them, because if it hasn't been included in the exemptions, then it creates a kind of a two-tier planning situation. Those at the on the beachfront will have the exemption, but the second row of houses behind will not. So I'm just looking for clarification on that, because in the report I couldn't find anything that related to the second row, didn't address that issue that I specifically raised in my submission.
Well, I was going to say, potentially, the council officers be able to respond to that?
So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, your area of land you're currently referring to as zone rural lifestyle?
That's correct.
Yeah, so the changes recommended in the coastal environment chapter didn't recommend any changes to the underlying zoning per se. We just made that distinction between urban areas and non-urban areas and relaxed some of the controls in urban areas. So I guess the relief you're sort of seeking is a site-specific part of the rural lifestyle zoning potentially being in that urban category. Is that sort of what you're asking?
Yeah, so is that included in the in Appendix 4? You had some maps, but it didn't seem to include Long Beach. So am I assuming that map will actually change?
No, so the recommendation in terms of relaxing those the rules related to urban areas, that only related to mixed use zone, light industrial zone, multi-purpose urban zone, and I'm probably missing one or two others, but it didn't extend into rural lifestyle zoning. So if your property is zoned rural lifestyle, there hasn't been any changes in terms of the controls that apply. I've been saying that it has been slightly relaxed outside those areas, but probably not to the extent that you're seeking in your submission.
Yeah, so I covered this in my evidence at paragraphs 172 to 177. Robert's submission is not seeking all of the rural lifestyle zone being outside the coastal environment. The basic argument is that the second row of houses which are in the rural lifestyle along Long Beach are indiscernible from the houses in front of it between those houses and the beach, which are in the Kororaraka Russell Township zone. And that's an unusual situation, and that the second row of houses should be treated similarly to the Russell Township zone, so that they're covered by per one of the CER1, and also that they're covered by having the underlying zone height control, not the coastal environment one, and they also don't have the colours maintained, but it's only for that specific row of houses along the back of Long Beach.
Sorry, through the chair,
Carol.
have you also got a submission point seeking rezoning of those?
Asking my question.
No, as I said, I support the protection of the ridge and the natural habitat on the ridge. It's just that when it comes to applying for additions and alterations, I'm going through a set of rules which are actually, different from the houses 3 to 5, 6 meters away from me on either side. Sorry, in front of me. So I just feel that I know that planners like consistency, but the consistency would be in this case that the urban part of the site would be having the relaxation from the coastal coastal environment overlay, but the rest of the site would stay under the coastal environment overlay?
Okay, so if I could just jump in there, is the issue how the mapping has affected your site, not necessarily its zoning?
Yeah, it's actually how the coastal overlay has affected the site, not the zoning.
Okay. Okay, so is that something the council has looked at specifically and perhaps maybe want to look at again?
I think it's something we can certainly address through reply. Like in our recommendations, we weren't trying to apply the rules differently for one zone versus another zone. We sort of apply it on a zone basis. Okay. So that's, I guess, where the issue lies here.
I'm not sure if you've heard the response, but basically the council officers get an opportunity to reply to the evidence in a couple of weeks' time, once they've sort of considered it all, and they've just said they'll have a look at how the mapping applies to your property in particular.
Is that reasonable? Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, I would suggest that's quite reasonable. Okay. Has anybody else got some specific questions of Mr. Riddell in his evidence?
No, there's a number of things, Andrew, that you raised. One of the things you raised was about reintroducing some objectives and policies from the existing operative plan, which just seemed to me to be going back in time rather than moving forward. Did you have a view on that at all?
I wouldn't say it's going back in time. It's actually looking at where you started from, and as you evolve along, the overriding or overarching resource management guidance hasn't changed a lot. I do note in there where the from hasn't changed a lot from the regional, when the regional policy statement was settled, and hasn't changed a lot from when the previous district plan was settled, into at least in terms of Russell Kororaraka. It's identical. We're just carrying it all the way through. So if I heard you right, I think that's what you're asking about.
Yeah, so in terms of the objectives and policies that are in the proposed plan, are they advancing those existing ones?
I think that the important thing about the previous objectives and policies is that they're there for a reason. In terms of the district plan, the major changes since then of consequence in terms of the coastal environment is the 2010 coastal policy statement, and also the regional policy statement. But I think that a lot of the points that are made in those existing objectives and policies, they're still valid resource management matters that need to be addressed. And I think that all the way through my statement, I do make that assessment and say whether there's a gap. Well, I think there's a gap that hasn't been carried through that should be.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, that's fine.
I just had a question for Mr. Riddell. In your submission, you highlight one of the interrelating rules for Indigenous biodiversity, which relates to the wildfire hazard rules. And this has been brought up in other submissions as well, and I know you're quite experienced in this area with your significant experience. When the submission here talks about 1,000 square meters of clearance, and then it also talks about 2,000 square meters of clearance that other submitters have requested. But then there's also reference to driveways as part of that discussion as well, which would obviously form part of the clearance. And then you go on, about basically the national policy statement and its intent. Are you able just to elaborate on your thinking about that? Because I think that's quite a pertinent issue to when we're looking at both Indigenous vegetation clearance as well as meeting the setback from fire hazards as well as making a driveway? And what is, reasonable to allow people to use their land compared to the intent of the National Policy Statement to preserve Indigenous biodiversity?
Okay, so the first thing is, I think I look at existing buildings and proposed new buildings as two different cases. With the existing buildings, which we assume were located in advance of or without, or may have got consent to locate within that 20-metre setback for fire purposes, then I think the permitted activity exception for Indigenous vegetation clearance is valid to apply to those existing buildings. When you've got a new building, you're going to have two cases. The first case is I want the building to be within that 20-metre, and I need to get a consent under the fire hazard rule, or it's going to be outside that 20-metre, and you don't need a consent to get the fire in terms of a fire rule. When it's inside the 20 metres and you go through the consent process, I would expect that the consent if you get a consent to locate within that distance, that the consent would actually stipulate or cover the future maintaining whatever clearance is settled on in a consent, maintaining whatever distance is settled on. The second case is where you're already outside the 20 metres. There is another exception which allows Indigenous vegetation clearance when the vegetation is less than 10 years old, so that if you are located outside that 20 metres, you'll be able to maintain that because you could control that. What concerned me in the officer's report was making new buildings, clearing for new buildings, in areas that meet the significant natural area criteria. In other words, are significant habitats of Indigenous flora, etc., as a permitted activity, and I don't think that the National Policy Statement on Indigenous biodiversity intends that, because of the way that the relevant policy talks about how you have to establish with a new use or development. And I quote, this is quoted in paragraph 202 of my evidence on page 40, that there's no practicable alternative location outside of that significant area, and that you use the effects management hierarchy. And I don't see how you can actually meet that policy as a permitted activity. I think you need to have a consenting process so that those two tests can be checked and established.
So you're saying if someone has 100% coverage on their site of bush, and that significant vegetation, that they should get a consent to clear it to build even a single house?
I'm saying that if you want to give effect to the National Policy Statement on Indigenous biodiversity, yes.
I guess the question would be, because of the legal advice we've had about the mapping of FCNAs, how is someone supposed to know if it's a significant natural area or not?
Well, that is the problem with the government's approach of not requiring that surveying. I note that the legal opinion that the council got does make the point that even if you're not even if you're delaying or meeting the time, the extended timetable to identify significant natural areas by map, you still have to meet section 6C, which means you still have to have a system for identifying what is significant. One of my other submissions, one of my other comments suggests a way of doing that by referring back to the regional policy statement criteria on significance. But in the absence of mapping, it becomes awkward and probably costly to the landowner.
Yeah, I don't really have a response. I don't have any further questions.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Riddell. I've just got one question. I know you make quite a few suggested amendments in your evidence, but I'd like to focus on one, please, and that's at starting the discussion at your paragraph 26. Coastal Environment Policy 10. And this is the whole crossing the boundary between, you know, what's happening below mean high water springs and what's happening on the land. I just didn't quite understand why you didn't think that the officers' recommended changes, particularly putting in L, clause L, was enough, and I just wouldn't mind a bit more explanation from you about that, please.
Okay, so that's talking about paragraph 26 to 30.
You're on foot?
Yep. Could you just give me a minute to quick skim it?
Sure.
Policy 4 of the coastal policy statement talks about integration across that boundary, the coastal marine area boundary, so that, you know, if you're building a boat ramp or a wharf, you've got a land component and a coastal marine area component, and that requires coordinated management actually between the regional council and the district council. And in my opinion, that intent to ensure that there is integrated management should be an objective as well as covered in the policy 10. I don't think it's sufficient just to cover it in the policy 10.
There's no objective currently that sort of hints at that outcome.
No, that's why I say that objective to minimise adverse effects from activities in the coastal environment that cross the coastal marine area boundary should be inserted as the fourth, I think, objective.
Okay, I understand that now. Thank you. That's good. That's clear. The only other thing I would like to just question you on is you cite that you've cited the code of conduct, but you've referenced the 2014 version of it. Are you aware there's a new version out these days? and does that make any difference? I guess.
I don't think it does. It's probably because I've cut and pasted from the earlier piece of evidence with the introduction.
Thank you for your honest response.
I think you should just say you've had 30 years experience, Andrew. You don't need it.
I won't take that any further. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much. We haven't got any further questions for you. Mr. Riddell, thank you very much for a really comprehensive piece of evidence, and I know you're taking on this role altruistically, and it's appreciated and it's been well received. Mr. Adams, the officers have undertaken to have a look at mapping as it applies to your property, and so watch out for the officer's written reply in a couple of weeks' time. Other than that, I think we don't have any more questions for you, so thanks again for your attendance.
Yeah, just a couple of things I just remembered. One of them is that The 3 coastal hazard rules, are they being dealt with all the other natural hazard hearing?
Yes, my understanding is that all hazards are being dealt with together, including coastal.
Okay, good. I was just a bit unclear about that.
That's okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I would say save time, but I think you already are. But I'm sure we'll see you at another hearing later on, I assume.
I would expect so.
Yes.
Russell has still got Kororaraka coming.
Actually, I'll be in Russell in the weekend. I might have to swing by Long Beach to have a look at your property.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
well, you're from Waitangi Limited and you're speaking tomorrow. You gave me a little bit of anxiety thinking that. I missed it and yeah, that's right. Well, thank you very much. Look, we ended up finishing at 5:02, and I'm going to use the Swedish rounding method to say that we finished at 5 o'clock. And so we can all pat ourselves on the back.
Close with that.
And we'll close. Thank you very much to the council officers again today for your contributions and participation, and we'll close on the count again.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Kia horahia te maneno, kia papa paunamu te moana. Hei hurahi mo tātou e te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ki a tātou katoa. May peace be widespread, may the ocean glisten as greenstone, a pathway for us all to stay. Let us show respect for each other, for one another, bind us all together.
And
Stop the recording.
that's all right.